Can we design learning experiences to encourage curiosity? Hello, my name is Rasika. I'm an instructional designer with a master's in digital humanities, and most of my work in education happens in the back end, behind the scenes. I design courses and I build online modules, and I try my best to simply have education online work for both teachers and students alike. But recently, I had the opportunity to experience what the front end of education feels like. I tutored a 10-year-old child for a couple of months. The parents didn't actually give me a specific curriculum to follow. They asked a very specific brief though. Because I've been homeschooled and their child has just recently been homeschooled and it was transitioning from a traditional form of education that didn't suit him to suddenly being homeschooled and having different tutors for each subjects, they wanted me to accompany him in that transition and to make him like learning, to make him more comfortable in learning, to make him feel capable, to broaden his mind, and to see education as not just something that belongs to textbooks, but actually something that is lived on a daily basis. As an instructional designer, having no clear, measurable learning objective was a little hard, but at the same time, I was really happy to take on the challenge, and a question started forming right off. So what if the goal is to make someone want to go look for knowledge, to keep looking, especially as a child? How can I encourage a child to be more curious? There was just one problem. I didn't know the child. I had never met him. He lived about 10,000 kilometers from me, and I only had twice a week 45-minute sessions with him via video call. I was essentially just a stranger on the screen, and I had no guarantee that whatever I would propose to him would feel enlivening and would actually suit him. Because none of the things that made teaching easier in person were available to me. I had to think outside of the box. And there was one real objective that turned up, and it was quite simple in its theory, but quite difficult to put into motion. I needed to find a hook to hook him up. My first real objective was to interest him. I needed to find something that would hook his interest into following my sessions, basically. I really wanted him to be happy to show up, to be excited, to be looking forward even to our sessions, because he knew that he would be learning something that would interest him. The happy coincidence was that I had just finished designing a course about self-determination theory, and I took that knowledge, I researched it, and I thought that was the perfect theory to put into practice. So what is self-determination theory, basically? It was created by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, and at its core, essentially, it says that people have three basic psychological needs that drive motivation: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. This was my framework thinking about my problem of not knowing how to spark that motivation and that hook for learning. Obviously, I couldn't give him complete freedom because he's 10 years old and I'm the adult here, but I had a curriculum in mind because I knew more or less his grade and what he was supposed to see since he was switching schools and curriculums. I just had a global idea of what he was supposed to know by that age. So I put up a list of different topics that we'd explore together, and I asked him, "What do you like?" And he said, "Pirates." And I was like, okay, so we are going to study the spice route. The second need is competence. I didn't want every activity to feel like a test he might fail. I wanted him to have those little moments of feeling like, oh, I can do this. So obviously when I asked him what he liked, I also asked him to read, asked him different things where I could judge more or less his level so that I knew not to aim too high and make him feel like everything he was doing was a test. So instead of just handing him information, I gave him things to do with it. Little problems, little math problems here, little reading problems here, just things that he had definitely the skills to overcome, to figure out, and immediately think, I did that. So this was not the entirety of the lesson. It was just small parts here and there to give him the validation and that self-determination of, I can do this. Then there is relatedness, which was honestly tricky because of the remote setup. Again, I was just a stranger on the screen, so a huge part of my job became getting to know him, remembering what he liked, asking questions, laughing together, paying attention to how he reacted to things. That's one aspect of instructional design and my experiences of back-end only online learning that was really, really different because I had to imagine the learner, I had to imagine the personas. I could always just write objective on a page, but nothing beats sitting in front of an actual human being and realizing, oh, this is what it actually looks like. I think you have to experience the learner. Since I couldn't predict what would interest him, I could design the learning experience about curiosity itself. I didn't know him well enough to guess what would fascinate him 6 months down the line, but I could give him something interesting enough to make him ask, oh, what about this? So I built different doors with all behind those doors things that he was supposed to learn, and then I made him pick. And here I'm going to show you a little bit about how it looks like. So this is the first page of my online module. I designed it in Canva. It was exploration and trade. So obviously I had to start with certain aspects that were part of the curriculum for a child his age. So I was talking about Vasco da Gama, Cornelis de Houtman, Sir Francis Drake. I think it's really important to have this kind of knowledge because it's not necessarily that he's going to use it anytime in his life, but just to know that this is part of history. Those are famous names that you don't just go, sometimes there's road Vasco da Gama and be like, who the hell was he? No, he needs to have certain, in French we say general culture, just like having general knowledge of things and people. So as we were entering the topic of pirates, we spoke about the spice route, what was traded, the popularity of spices, why they were such a luxurious item, and for him to imagine also that at some point in people's lives, people didn't know the spices like the way that we know. They only had very minimal spice, and how it was also beneficial in terms of keeping the food longer. So that was an important aspect, I think, to make it relatable in a way that some people have really lived like that. It's not just history, as in like a fancy story. Those are actually relating things that have actually happened. We also talk about navigation and maps and how maps have changed a lot since then. And it was thanks to all those explorers that we now have a more precise idea of how our world is shaped. And then we finally spoke about the golden age of pirates, now that he had a comprehensive idea of how important was navigation back in the day. So we talk about various different pirates, real life pirates. I thought that was important to look at those famous navigators because I wanted him to not just see pirates as the cartoon bad guys, but as real people, why they became pirates, what they were fighting for, and how messy and complicated history actually is. So, for example, Henry Every, he retired instead of getting caught or killed. I thought that was also a nice moral lesson on how he didn't let his greed kill him, basically. Then we had Bartholomew Roberts, who was very disciplined and was very strict, and that he instaured the pirate code. Then there's Kanoji Angre, that was doing resistance against unfair power. I thought it was also nice to include less known, perhaps, at least in Europe, pirates, so that we have a comprehensive idea that it's not just white men that were pirates. So this, of course, this person here has been called a pirate by Europeans. He was not actually a pirate, but that gives also the two sides of a whole story. I also wanted to include a woman in the influential pirate, and especially someone as successful as Shang-Chi, because she was extremely strategic and she was very powerful. And I thought that was interesting also to add this because it's not necessarily spoken about, or at least I had no clue who she was until I did my research. This is a sample of the little activities that I would design. Those are either simple math problems, or I also had recognizing the spices, and I also had what lives in Indonesia. All those little exercise where he could actually test his competence out, and at the end of the exercise feel like I can do this. So that's where we were at regarding the spice route. We then made a little zoom on Indonesia because he had recently moved there from Europe, and I wanted him to know a little bit more of the country he moved to. So we spoke about Indonesia, the Garuda Pancasila, which is the symbol of the Republic of Indonesia, immersing him into the Indonesian culture. Of course, I've put a traditional Balinese culture in here because that's where he moved to, but I know that Indonesian culture doesn't just limit itself at that. We talk about batik, about the wonders of Indonesia, such as Borobudur, Prambanan, Kelimutu, do a little bit of geology and talk about the Wallace Line. So if you can see, I've shown him a little bit like snippets of different things that we could explore. And then after I asked him what interests you the most in all of that, and he chose the fauna and flora. So that's why we chose the animals you'll see in Bali. And so that was an interesting part because that was his choice. So he was very happy to see that. And from there on, we looked at different videos, we explored different things, and that's what inspired him to do his video on snakes. I think this is where my love of multi-purpose things really came into the design. One topic didn't just belong to just one subject. Pirates could be history and geography and ethics and storytelling. A math problem could actually be a story. A spice could crack open a geography lesson or economics, culture, even cooking lessons. I'm always asking, how can this one thing mean something, do something, and lead to something else, all at the same time? Even though I had to stop deciding what the next door would be, I wanted to choose. So at the end, I asked him to pick one thing we'd explore together that he wanted to dig into further. He chose fauna and flora, and more specifically, snakes. That was fun. So we looked at little things here and there. I asked him to take notes, to learn how to take notes. Oh yeah, taking notes, by the way, is also something that I wanted to include into all of that. I feel that in my education, methodology and like learning how to do research, taking notes, making briefs of stories and everything, that came quite late in my education. That's just how the French curriculum system works. But I think that I would have greatly benefited as a child to know about it earlier, not necessarily have it extended to a university level, but just at least know that those things exist. So we did a little bit of methodology, and I taught him some initial clues to take notes. So I asked him to do a presentation about snakes, and he ended up making a little video about snakes in the forest, and he weaved in some storytelling and some things that we learned along the way. And for me, that was the peak of this experience, seeing that he actually enjoyed learning, actually enjoyed producing something that was related to education. At that time, I looked back and I remembered that little boy dangling off his chair. He was humming all the time. As soon as I was not saying something that was interesting, he was humming, he was looking elsewhere, he was moving a lot. And by the end of the lesson, he was sitting straight, he was looking straight into the camera, he was asking questions, he was laughing, he was cracking jokes, and he was As soon as I was, for example, talking about geography, he would run to his map on the wall to check to be sure that he understood properly. And for me, the contrast was black and white. So, to answer, can we design a learning experience that encourage curiosity? Yes, I think we can. I don't think curiosity is something that we have to teach from scratch. It's already there in most people, and especially in children, but I think we can design in order to enhance it. We can't design curiosity itself, but we can definitely design the conditions for it to grow by giving learners space to make choices, by giving them challenge to make them feel capable. We can connect what they're learning to who they are or what they already know. We can give them questions instead of always handing them the answers. And we can build learning experience where one discovery naturally opens the door to the next. Thank you for following along this case study and my experience about learning design and curiosity. I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to talk more about instructional design. If you have any suggestions, please leave a comment and I'll catch you very soon.